"Ma'am, I think you might be in the wrong place." The voice was confident, smooth, and laced with a patronizing helpfulness that set her teeth on edge. She turned slowly. A Marine captain stood before her, his posture a perfect image of parade ground swagger. The name Evans was stitched above his right breast pocket. His jaw was sharp, his haircut meticulously faded, and his smile was the kind of practiced, charming thing meant to disarm and dismiss in a single expression. "The Dependence Cafe is over by the exchange," he continued, gesturing vaguely with his thumb. "Much quieter over there. Better coffee, too. We can get you pointed in the right direction." Agnes Crawford looked at the captain. She didn't look at the silver bars on his collar or the ribbons on his chest. She looked at his eyes. They were clear, untroubled, and utterly certain of the world and his place in it. He saw an old woman, lost and confused, a civilian intruding on his warrior's sanctuary. He saw her gray hair, the fine lines around her eyes, and the civilian clothes, and his mind filled in the rest of the story. She was a mother visiting her son, a widow looking for the retiree affairs office, a grandmother who had simply wandered into the wrong building. Her own eyes, the color of a pale winter sky, held his gaze. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but carried a resonance that cut through the surrounding noise. "I'm in the right place, Captain." Captain Evans's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before reasserting itself, tighter this time. "Well, this facility is primarily for active duty personnel during the lunch rush. Base regulations. It gets pretty loud in here." He was talking to her as if she were a child, his tone slow and overly patient. "I'm aware of the regulations," she said, her voice remaining perfectly even. He let out a small, indulgent sigh. "Look, ma'am, I'm just trying to help you out. Do you have a dependent ID, or are you a guest of someone on base? I can call them for you. Let them know you're waiting." She held up the hand that wasn't holding her tray. In it was a standard common access card, the kind carried by every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine. She held it for him to see. "My identification is in order." Captain Evans took the card, his fingers brushing hers. He glanced at it, his eyes flicking over her photo, a much younger version of her, in uniform, her expression stern, and then to the information printed below. He saw the name, Agnes M. Crawford. He saw the rank, and he saw the word that confirmed all his assumptions. Retired. A knowing smirk touched his lips. He handed the card back to her. "Okay, I see. A veteran. We thank you for your service, of course. But this is still a pretty hectic environment for our retirees. There's a much more comfortable dining facility over at the Smithson building." He was no longer suggesting. He was guiding her, using the subtle pressure of his presence and his rank to herd her toward the door. He took a half step, positioning himself in her path to the seating area. "Captain," she said, her voice losing none of its calm but gaining a new hard edge like ice forming on still water. "I am authorized to be here. Please step aside." His condescension finally curdled into irritation. The charming smile vanished, replaced by a look of crisp professional authority. He was a company commander. He was used to being obeyed. He was not used to being challenged by old women in tweed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my Marines are trying to eat. This is their time. I can't have civilians causing a disruption. Base policy is clear. Now I'm going to have to ask you to please come with me." He wasn't asking. It was an order, wrapped in the thinnest veneer of politeness. The low hum of the mess hall was beginning to change. Conversations closer to the confrontation were sputtering out. Young Marines, forks halfway to their mouths, were watching the exchange. They saw a captain, their leader, dealing with a confused old lady. Most of them felt a vague sense of pity for her. A few felt a prickle of unease at the captain's heavy-handedness. Agnes didn't move. She simply stood there, her tray held level, her gaze unwavering. "You are citing a policy that doesn't exist, Captain, and you are standing in my way. This is for your own safety and security," he insisted, his voice rising slightly. He was becoming aware of his audience. He needed to resolve this quickly, assert his dominance, and get back to being the respected leader. "This ID card is decades old. The system probably can't even read it properly anymore. We need to verify your status. It's a security protocol." He reached for the radio on his shoulder, ready to call the Provost Marshal's office. He was escalating. He was going to have this woman, this relic from a bygone era, removed. He would be seen as firm but fair, a protector of the rules, a guardian of the Corps' sacred spaces. The pressure of the moment was immense. The stares of the young Marines, the captain's unyielding arrogance, the sheer absurdity of it all. For a fleeting second, Agnes felt the deep, wearying frustration that had been a constant companion for much of her early career. The endless need to prove herself, To be twice as good to be considered half as capable. The quiet condescension, the outright hostility, the thousand tiny cuts of being a woman in a man's world. Her hand, the one holding her purse, tightened. Her knuckles brushed against a familiar heavy object deep inside. It was a coin, its edges worn smooth from years of being carried. It was thick and heavy, not a standard unit coin. It felt cool against her skin, an anchor in the storm of the present. The worn metal was a key, and it unlocked a memory. The mess hall in Lejeune dissolved, replaced by the acrid, dust-choked air of a command tent outside Fallujah in 2004. The canvas walls flapped in a hot, gritty wind. She was a colonel then, her uniform stained with sweat and the fine tan powder that got into everything. The noise wasn't the clatter of trays, it was the distant, rhythmic thump of mortars and the crackle of a radio. Her sergeant major, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard-won battles, had stood before her desk. He'd placed this very coin on her map, covering a grid coordinate that had cost them 2 good Marines that morning. For the CO, he'd said, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion, the one who never flinched. She blinked. The mess hall snapped back into focus. The captain was still there, his hand on his radio, his face a mask of righteous certainty. He saw a frail old woman. He had no idea he was talking to the CO who never flinched. At a table not 20 feet away, Gunnery Sergeant Reyes was finishing his lunch. He was an old-school gunny, with more time in the fleet than Captain Evans had been alive. He'd noticed the confrontation, initially with the mild annoyance of a senior NCO watching a junior officer make a hash of a simple human interaction. It was textbook overreach. You don't dress down a civilian, especially an elderly one, in the middle of a crowded chow hall. It was poor form. He watched the captain demand her ID, saw the woman hold it up with quiet dignity. He couldn't see the details, but he saw her face. There was something familiar about her, the set of her jaw, the unwavering steel in her eyes. He'd seen that look before, in portraits that hung in the halls of Quantico and Paris Island, the ones you walked past 1,000 times until one day you actually stopped and read the brass plate underneath. Then he heard her name, carried on the air as the captain spoke it with disdain. Agnes M. Crawford. Gunnery Sergeant Reyes froze, his fork hovering over his plate. Crawford. The name echoed in his memory, pulled from some dusty corner where he stored Marine Corps history and lore. It couldn't be. He discreetly pulled his phone from his pocket, keeping it below the level of the table. He didn't Google her. He texted a number he kept for emergencies, a direct line to the division sergeant major. His thumbs flew across the screen, the message short and brutally efficient. Sergeant Mage, Gunny Reyes here. You are not going to believe this. I think Mage N. Crawford is in the 2nd MAF mess hall. A captain from 3/8 is about to call the PMO on her. He hit send. The response came back in less than 10 seconds. It was a single word, standby. Reyes let out a slow breath and put his phone away. He looked over at Captain Evans, who was now speaking into his radio, his voice full of self-importance. The gunny felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach, not for the old woman, but for the young, arrogant captain who had just unpinned a grenade and swallowed it. He was watching a man end his own career in real time, and all for the crime of not being able to see past a little gray hair and a tweed suit. The entire mess hall was now a silent theater. The only sound was Captain Evans's voice, clear and authoritative, as he spoke to the dispatcher. Yes, this is Captain Evans at Mess Hall 411. I require PMO assistance. I have an unauthorized civilian, an elderly female, refusing to comply with base regulations. She is in possession of what appears to be a fraudulent retired ID card. He clicked off the radio and turned back to Agnes, his expression one of finality. He had followed procedure. He had asserted his authority. The situation was now in the hands of law enforcement. They're on their way, ma'am, he said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a kindness. They'll help you get this all sorted out. Agnes simply nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. She did not look afraid. She did not look angry. She looked patient, as if she were waiting for a tardy staff officer to arrive for a morning brief. The calm was more unnerving to the onlookers than any outburst would have been. It was the calm of the storm's eye, and everyone in that room could feel the winds beginning to pick up. The call from the PMO dispatcher was automatically cross-referenced and flagged. An alert involving a potentially fraudulent ID card at a major dining facility was standard procedure. But the name attached to the alert, Agnes M. Crawford, triggered a secondary protocol, one so rarely used that the duty officer had to look it up. The protocol was simple. Any incident involving a flag officer, active or retired, required immediate notification of the base command element. In a quiet, wood-paneled office in the division headquarters building, Colonel Maria Ramirez was signing a stack of paperwork when her executive officer, a young female lieutenant, burst in without knocking. "Ma'am, you need to see this." Colonel Ramirez looked up, her pen hovering over a signature line. She was a formidable officer, a career logistician who had earned her eagle through sheer competence and a will of iron. Her expression did not invite trivial interruptions. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "A security alert from Mess Hall 411, ma'am. A Captain Evans has reported a woman for fraudulent ID. The name on the ID is Agnes M. Crawford." Ramirez's eyes narrowed. "Crawford, run that name." The lieutenant was already typing on a tablet. She turned the screen toward the colonel. On it was a digital service record file. The first thing visible was the official portrait. It was Agnes Crawford, 20 years younger, in the service uniform of a United States Marine Corps Major General. Colonel Ramirez's face went pale. She scrolled down, her eyes scanning decades of service condensed into black and white text. Officer Candidate School, 1978. One of the first women integrated into a non-administrative MOS. Platoon Commander, Company Commander. A Bronze Star from Desert Storm for orchestrating the logistics of an entire armored push under constant threat of Scud attack. Battalion Command. A tour at the Pentagon. Colonel G4 for the 1st Marine Division during the invasion of Iraq. She saw after-action reports she had only read as historical documents, and there was Crawford's name listed as the commanding officer. She saw deployment after deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan, long after most would have retired to a quiet life. She saw the citation for a Silver Star, awarded for her actions during the Second Battle of Fallujah, where she had personally organized casualty evacuation and ammunition resupply lines under direct enemy fire when her command post was hit by mortars. She saw a legend, not a statue or a name on a building, but a living, breathing architect of the modern Marine Corps she herself served in. She saw the woman who had kicked down the doors so that she, Maria Ramirez, could one day walk through them to command a regiment. "Get the sergeant major," Ramirez said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. She was already on her feet, grabbing her cover from its stand. "Get my vehicle. Now." Back in the mess hall, Captain Evans was enjoying his victory. The silence of the room was, to him, a sign of respect for his authority. The PMO would arrive, the old woman would be quietly removed, and he would have made his point. Standards are standards. He decided to deliver one final, magnanimous piece of advice. "You see, ma'am," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a weary instructor. "The rules are here for a reason. These credentials, they expire. The systems change. You probably don't even remember the current procedures for base access. It's not your fault, but trying to use an ID this old, well, that's fraudulent wear. That's a serious offense." He had crossed the line from arrogance to insult, from a misinterpretation of rules to a direct accusation of criminal intent. He was so focused on his own performance that he didn't hear the screech of tires outside. He didn't notice the way every head in the room, except for his and Agnes's, snapped toward the main entrance. The doors swung open with a force that made them bang against the stoppers. Colonel Maria Ramirez strode into the mess hall as if she owned it. She was flanked by her division sergeant major, a man who looked like he had been chiseled from granite, and the young female lieutenant who had brought her the alert. They moved as one, a trinity of command, and a wave of electricity shot through the room. Every Marine in the mess hall who wasn't already standing shot to their feet. The sound of 100 chairs scraping against the linoleum was like a single clap of thunder. Trays were abandoned. Conversations died in mid-syllable. The air crackled with the sudden absolute imposition of authority. Captain Evans turned, his smug expression dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He saw the eagle on the colonel's collar, and felt a cold dread wash over him. He snapped to the position of attention so fast he nearly stumbled. Colonel Ramirez didn't even glance at him. Her eyes were fixed on only one person in the room. She marched directly to Agnes Crawford, her heels clicking a sharp rhythmic cadence on the floor. She stopped precisely 2 feet in front of the older woman, her body ramrod straight. Then, in a move that sent a shockwave through the entire room, Colonel Ramirez, the Division G3, a woman known for her demanding and unyielding standards, executed the sharpest, most respectful salute of her life. "General Crawford," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and deference that no one in that room had ever heard from her. "A distinct honor to see you on base, ma'am. Colonel Ramirez. It is a privilege to welcome you back to Camp Lejeune." The title hung in the dead silent air. "General." Captain Evans felt the blood drain from his face. His knees felt weak. The word echoed in his skull, replaying over and over. General. Not a dependent. Not a lost retiree. A general officer. He looked at the old woman in the tweed suit, at her calm, steady eyes and her long gray hair, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the authority she had carried so quietly, the power she held in reserve. He wasn't looking at a grandmother, he was looking at a titan. The division sergeant major and the lieutenant also rendered salutes, their faces etched with a combination of awe and fury. Colonel Ramirez held her salute until Agnes returned a slow, graceful one of her own. Then she lowered her hand and, still ignoring Captain Evans, addressed Agnes as if they were the only two people in the room. "Ma'am, I apologize for the reception. Had we known you were on base, we would have provided a proper escort." She then turned her head slightly, her gaze finally falling upon Captain Evans. Her eyes were like chips of obsidian. "While I, on the other hand," she continued, her voice dropping to a glacial temperature, "had no idea that one of my company commanders was so utterly incapable of identifying a senior officer, showing basic human decency, or reading a standard military identification card." She took a step closer to Evans, whose entire body was now trembling. "Let me enlighten you, Captain," Ramirez said, her voice dangerously low but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "You are standing in the presence of Major General Agnes Crawford. She was wearing a Marine Corps uniform when your parents were still in high school. She commanded a logistics battalion in Desert Storm and kept tanks moving when you were learning to ride a bicycle. I am a colonel today, in command of Marines in this division, because she was a colonel in Fallujah, directing artillery and medevacs under fire while men younger and stronger than you were taking cover." Ramirez took another step, her voice rising now, filled with a cold, righteous anger. Her monograph on expeditionary logistics is required reading for every officer at Quantico. Her portrait hangs in the Commandant's Hall. She didn't just serve in the Marine Corps, Captain. She helped build it into what it is today. She endured more prejudice and overcame more obstacles before she even made major than you will likely face in your entire career. And you had the unmitigated gall to threaten to have her arrested because you mistook her age for weakness and her gender for irrelevance. The public shaming was absolute, a clinical dissection of his failure in front of his peers and subordinates. The young Marines who had pitied the old woman were now staring at her with a new, profound respect. They were in the presence of living history, a legend they had only read about in books. They saw the quiet woman in tweed, and now understood the decades of grit and steel that lay beneath. Finally, after a long, tense silence, Agnes spoke. Her voice, as always, was calm, cutting through the thick atmosphere of the room. "Colonel," she said, addressing Ramirez but looking at Captain Evans. The captain was attempting to enforce what he believed were the standards. The failure wasn't in the intent, but in the observation. She turned her steady gaze fully onto the captain. He flinched as if struck. "Captain," Agnes said, and her tone was not angry but instructive, the voice of a lifelong leader and teacher. "The uniform changes, the hair goes gray, the body slows down, but the standards don't. Experience doesn't expire with youth. Your job as a leader is to see the Marine, not the vessel they occupy. You look for the bearing, you verify the credentials, and you grant the appropriate respect. You don't see a woman and assume she's a wife. You don't see gray hair and assume she's lost. That's a failure of observation that will get your Marines killed on the battlefield, and it will cripple your leadership off of it." Her words landed with the weight of 3 decades of command. It wasn't a rebuke, it was a lesson, a hard one delivered on the unforgiving stage of public failure, but a lesson nonetheless. As she spoke about observation, about seeing what was truly there, another memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was the origin of the sergeant major's respect, the reason for that heavy coin in her purse. Fallujah. The mortar attack had been sudden, brutal. Her command post, a hastily fortified building, took a direct hit. The world became noise, dust, and the screams of the wounded. Her radio operator was down. Her executive officer was disoriented, and a young captain not unlike Evans, full of confidence and bravado, was frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with terror. She remembered moving past him, her voice never rising. She grabbed a field radio from a dead Marine, calmly began calling for counter-battery fire, her words precise and clear amidst the chaos. She directed the corpsmen to the most gravely wounded, organized the remaining staff to establish a new perimeter, and got the ammunition resupply moving, all while plaster dust rained down from the shattered ceiling. She hadn't flinched. She had observed the chaos, processed it, and imposed order upon it. That was leadership. It had nothing to do with age or gender, and everything to do with a core of unshakable steel. That was what Captain Evans had failed to see. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled, efficient activity. Colonel Ramirez personally escorted Major General Crawford to the head table, the one normally reserved for visiting dignitaries. A mess sergeant looking mortified, hurried over with a fresh tray of food, the best the kitchen had to offer. Captain Evans was quietly but firmly ordered by the division sergeant major to report to Colonel Ramirez's office at 1300 sharp. He simply nodded, his face ashen, and walked out of the mess hall like a man heading to his own execution. The whispers that followed him were not of ridicule but of awe for the woman he had wronged. In the weeks that followed, the story of Captain Evans and the general in the mess hall became a piece of Lejeune folklore, a cautionary tale told in squad bays and NCO lounges. But the impact was more than just a story. A base-wide directive was issued by the commanding general's office, clarifying and reinforcing the procedures for interacting with veterans and retirees on base. It included a specific, strongly worded section on avoiding assumptions based on age, gender, or civilian attire, and mandated that all gate guards and leadership personnel attend a refresher course on military courtesy and customs that now included historical examples of trailblazing women in the service. Furthermore, Colonel Ramirez, inspired by the incident, established a new professional military education series on base called Giants of the Corps. It was a lecture program designed to connect young Marines with legendary veterans who had shaped the institution. The first speaker by unanimous request was Major General Agnes Crawford, retired. She spoke to a packed auditorium of over 1,000 Marines, not about the disrespect she faced in the mess hall, but about the lessons of leadership she had learned over 35 years of service. She spoke of courage, integrity, and the sacred trust between a leader and their Marines. She never once mentioned Captain Evans. She didn't have to. About a month later, Agnes was in the base exchange, looking for a birthday gift for her grandson. She was browsing a rack of t-shirts when a familiar figure approached her. It was Evans. He was not in uniform. He looked thinner, the cocksure swagger completely gone, replaced by a deep-seated humility. He stood a respectful distance away until she acknowledged him. "General Crawford," he said, his voice quiet and steady. "Captain," she replied, her tone neutral. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize, properly. What I did in the mess hall was inexcusable. There's no justification for my ignorance or my arrogance. I failed as an officer and as a Marine. I'm sorry." The apology was direct, sincere, and devoid of excuses. Agnes studied him for a long moment. She saw the shame in his eyes, but also a flicker of something new, a sense of self-awareness he hadn't possessed before. "Everyone makes mistakes, Captain," she said finally. "I've made my share. Good leaders learn from them. The best leaders learn from them without needing a colonel and a sergeant major there to point them out. You have an opportunity to be one of the best. Don't waste it." She offered a small, brief smile, then turned her attention back to the t-shirts, the conversation over. Evans stood there for a second longer, then nodded to himself, turned and walked away, a different man than the one who had entered the mess hall a month before. Agnes picked out a shirt for her grandson, paid at the counter, and walked out into the bright Carolina sun, a living legend moving unseen among the new generation, her legacy secured not just in the history books but in the hard-won lessons she continued to teach. If you were moved by the story of Major General Crawford, a true pioneer who proved that valor has no age and leadership knows no gender, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to She Chose Valor for more stories that honor the incredible women who have served our nation.